Hey, folks, it is March the 26th, and we're going to continue on with our voting lecture. So, last time we left off on the local level, and we're going to move on from there. I posted an updated set of notes that I'm going to go over with the class here for you so you can follow along through that and all that good stuff. If you have not turned in your most recent assignments, make sure you do so or forever hold your peace. All right. Conducting elections. So, like we mentioned last time, the federal government provides a basic framework for elections in the United States. However, once again, it's the states that provide like the really close, detailed information because it's their responsibility. It's their constitutional responsibility. The states are supposed to oversee it. Part of it has to do with the founders knew that each state would have different, not just methods and traditions, but different needs. Like y'all were mentioning earlier, some places are more rural. So you might need rules that help out more of a rural-based population. And some places are more urban. And so they have those for their considerations. In this section, I itemized several key aspects of elections governed by state laws. So first off, we have this hours of voting. State laws determine the hours that polls are open for each state. So in Maryland, and remember this was made in like 2012. Maryland and Washington, D.C., voters will vote from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., but Virginia is from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. And so, especially if you're watching a presidential election and you're watching an update that map, you'll see that some of these things come in at different times. And when the polls close is when they're able to get more of an accurate count. And so, yeah, you'll see like the state closes in, and not to mention you also have time zones and stuff like that. So it can make it a pretty complicated process. And considering here in Virginia it closes at 7 p.m., that's tough because a lot of people can't get off work to go vote. They have to vote either before or after work, which is another reason why some people do early voting. You know, people have options for that. So how voters can vote. In general, voters in the U.S. can cast ballots in 3 separate ways. So you have election day voting. I usually try to avoid this one. It's usually kind of packed. In all states but Oregon and Washington, as of then, a lot have changed. Voters can cast a ballot in person at the polling place at election day. Nationally, this is the most common way in which voters cast ballots. 63% of ballots cast in the 2008 presidential election were cast in person on election day. Now, I'm sure that the most recent one is probably going to be very off because we had like record numbers of mail-in ballots last time. And so also several states had extensions up to weeks past election day. And so this is how it works in a normal election process, a normal year. So just so you know, and then 2008 is when you had, I believe, what was McCain versus Obama.
Yeah.
And so number 2, in-person early vote. In 32 states, voters can cast ballots in a small number of polling places in the electoral jurisdiction during the weeks prior to election day. And so, like, Texas is one of these. Like, we'll have early voting days. That's what I try to do. You know, like, I would go down there, bring my kids. I'll tell them which buttons to push and all that stuff, and then they get a sticker. This process is intended to make it easier for voters who may have difficulty voting on election day. In 2008, 18% of ballots in the presidential election were cast early. So, yeah, I mean, especially like if you look like ahead of time, you know you won't be able to vote on election day. This is a good way to do it. It really is. Sometimes, though, when people early vote, they might find out some news about their candidate later, and then they have buyer's remorse. But so make sure you know who you're voting for first. So you're not like later on be like, I didn't know that person said that. Oh man, you know, and then like, pull your hair out. All right. Number 3, by mail early voting. This is what I was talking about earlier. In all states, voters can cast ballot by mail. However, in 29 states, now this is back in 2012, Voters do not have to provide an excuse such as having physical disability or being out of town on election day. I think it's most states now. In order to obtain mail-in ballot. In several states, it's possible for a voter to sign up to be a permanent mail-in voter, meaning the voter will automatically receive a ballot in the mail prior to election day. There's talks in Washington right now where they're talking about trying to make this national standard. See that the thing is, I don't see how that would work out according to the Constitution because it's, like we said, it is a state matter. Of course, there are criticisms for mail-in voting because of allegations of mail tampering, but there's ways to tamper with all forms of voting, like they all can, whether it's electronic, by mail, or physical. There's a way to do it, and it's one of those things you have to be diligent about. Ballot design. The way in which ballots look in the U.S. state to state, so you can't really take them across state lines. Is basically so. All right, voter registration. In the United States, it is incumbent on the voter. That means it's your responsibility. You choose to register. States and localities do not have any citizen or eligible voter registry they can use or rely on for voter registration. Although the basic framework for voter registration is set at the federal level, states can determine what time to close their voter rolls for new applications. This time frame varies from 1 month to another. And so what they're saying is that there's some states where you can register to vote on the day you vote. So you can just show up and be like, I'm not registered. Where do I sign? Then you register, then you vote. So, whereas other states, you have to register well in advance and all that. So
I remember whenever the world's destiny was in the hand.
What?
I remember whenever the world's destiny was in the hands of gamblers, I don't know, everything else. Whenever it was like down to Nevada, the world's destiny was in the hands of a whole bunch of losers like that. Or like the
What are you talking
population of the world. Huh?
Talking about this election?
you talking about 2016?
No, 2020.
Because I know 2016, like there's a lot of people watching the guys gambling on who'd win presidency.
No, it was because the last place in the 2020 election was actually Nevada. And like the only major population center there is Las Vegas.
Yeah, most of that state's owned by the feds, basically, like just
It's
national land.
It's like it's mostly nature reserves,
Mhm.
mostly like desert, and bases, military bases.
Yeah. Most of it you're not allowed to travel to and stuff like that too. All right, so voter IDs. So this is another hot topic idea right now. The way voters are identified and authenticated is qualified voters vary by state. So once again, this is a state by state thing, and this has come under some criticism if you remember our warm up the other day, because there's some criticism that it puts on undue burden on certain groups of people. Whereas others are like, well, it's free, just get your ID. The U.S. government does not provide a voter identification card for the purpose of voting. I mean, that's the thing. There is no federal government ID you can get. I guess the closest thing you can get is a passport.
What about military ID?
Well, yeah, if you're in the military, but if you can't get the military, you can't get it, right?
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, for like everybody.
Oh.
Like everybody can get a passport. Now they can invalidate your passport. Like they're like, no, we're not going to let you travel across the country because you're a nefarious individual doing nefarious things.
Yeah. But doesn't that mean that they're also banned from voting? But if they didn't,
Well, no, not
actually be on the no-fly list. Would that also mean that they're not? Nope.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. No, if you're on the no-fly list, that doesn't have anything to do with your right to vote. But I mean, like the no-fly list, though, there's some questions though, because you haven't been found guilty of a crime and you're not under arrest. Well, it's like, and sometimes there have been quite a few people who are like completely innocent of any allegation, haven't even charged or anything, but they're accidentally put on the no-fly list because they share a name with somebody else who's on it. And so that's a pretty big civil liberty issue right
I feel
there.
bad for the John Smiths and the Jane Does out there.
Well, I mean, And there's also, it's one of those things you have to be careful because whenever you, even if one party's in power, if they ever increase their power, they're not just increasing their power, they're increasing the other party's power too, because it always flips. It always flips. And whenever it flips, the other side gets buyer's remorse. So, because it never relinquishes power. And that's one of the things like 9/11. It's like a lot of law enforcement powers really, really, really went up. But then they moved into ways like we didn't quite foresee afterwards. So we'll talk about that later on. We talk about civil rights and liberties and stuff like that after we talk about election and parts of government and state government stuff. So, however, in many states, such cards do not satisfy the identification requirements for voter identification because these cards do not have a photo on them. So, I know here in Texas, from what was it? I was voting one time, and this girl came, and she was using her student ID to vote. But the thing is, she was registered in another district. So you got to make sure that you're also voting where you're supposed to be registered.
Yeah, that's fine. My dad said that like whenever I go off to college, if I want to vote, I have to come back here to vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, yeah, this girl was like from Louisiana or something like that. And she got mad. She started getting like really, really bougie on them and making a scene. I don't know. So just know that like when you go to vote, yeah, if you're in another state, you might have to come back home to vote, or you're going to have to register wherever you're at. You're going to have to do one or the other. So, you know. Voter ID. So just know you got to bring your identification with you. Here in Texas, just bring your driver's license. You don't have to bring your registration card. As long as you got your driver's license, you're good.
Or picture ID.
Yeah, picture ID. Like a picture ID, like could be the state ID. It could be handgun license. It could be, I think you could use student IDs now, stuff like that. So, yeah, as long as it's a valid ID. Voter identification. These laws can be characterized as strict or non-strict. Remember, this isn't entirely accurate anymore, considering it's like about 8 years old. So in 2012, there were 17 laws with a strict law. A voter who does not present a photo ID cannot cast a regular ballot. Instead, they can cast a provisional ballot, which they will have to validate later with their ID in order for it to be counted. So it's like, hey, I'm going to vote, but it doesn't count until I come back and prove I'm really me later, right? So, and 13 non-strict states, voters who do not present a voter ID may still be able to cast a regular ballot. And I think that number's bigger now, where you don't, there's a lot of states where you don't even need an ID anymore. You can go and vote. But what you do,
Well, that's a little silly.
when you do go and vote, they'll have their state registry. And it's usually based on home address and the name that matches it. And so you can sign up. And there have been conflicts where some people say they go up to vote and they find that somebody else voted under their name and they can't vote now. And so they're pretty mad about that. So, and that was a big problem, I think, in Austin here recently, where people would go vote and they'd be like, you already voted. I was like, no, I didn't. I am me. I didn't vote. So.
Wouldn't that bring up security concerns?
Yeah, but I mean,
That's why we should just do voter ID.
you need to have you'll have to have legislation to fix it because the people who say you don't want voter ID say they would rather err on the side of caution of allowing everyone to have their right to vote. Whereas, yeah, the other side would say they'd rather err on the side of caution that we don't want people to scam the system. And so, which one are you willing to err on? Everybody's guaranteed the right to vote no matter what, or we're going to make sure that it's super secure, huh? Is somebody at the door? I don't know. Just open the door. So, all right. Let's see how long is it. Okay. We'll do a couple more of these. All right. So this can bring up problems, though. So we need recounts, and sometimes it's challenged. So state recount laws fall into general categories, close outcome, and this happens sometimes. My wife was telling me about a congressperson who only won by 6 votes, a congresswoman, I forgot where at it, and that was after a recount. And they're still trying to see if if it should be recounted again or something like that. So this happens. Closed outcome recounts are conducted when election results for a given race is very close. Often when the candidates are separated by 0.5% of the vote. And there's some states where it can have a pretty, if there's like a 2% difference or something like that, they have to recount for like the presidential election. Candidate initiated recounts are allowed in several states, but the candidate has to pay for the recount because it takes cost. You have to pay poll workers and people recount it and all this other stuff. Citizen initiated recounts are much less common, but then you have to have the citizens have to pay for it. So you could have like a referendum or something like that. Be like, hey, we think that the count was off and we want to go back and do it again. Automatic recounts are conducted in several states for a sample of the precincts to ensure that the vote counts are accurate. So some places they do it automatically just to double check. Where voters vote, type of polling place in which people vote varies by jurisdiction. Most voters cast ballots in social buildings, such as schools, churches, community centers. I worked at a school and we had polls there. That was pretty easy to vote. I just walked down the hallway, click, and that's it. Now I vote in Noonday, and it's kind of like at this little community center or library thing. Almost 9% of voters cast ballots in private buildings. So private buildings, I don't know, I guess it's like a business. I guess if it's all you got in your little town, where you got a gas station and a dog, which happens. All right. There's a lot of places. So who runs elections at the local level, which are typical either counties and cities. Election officials are chosen through one of these methods. They're either elected individuals, they're appointed by a board of election, or appointed as an individual by election officials. Or wait, I heard this over. I messed up. All right. There's several ways for it to get picked. You don't have to memorize that. But just know in some places they're appointed and some places they're actually elected. So, hey folks, I think that's going to end it for today. So, and we're going to pick back up and talk a bit more about elections and how they work federally. And I'm going to try to find some information on, well, I have it. I just don't feel like digging through the books on how our state elections work out. So, but I kind of want to keep Texas stuff separate from the national stuff if possible. I think it gets a little confusing. All right. Hey, talk to you later. Next week is Friday off, huh? Good Friday. So don't be here next Friday. See you later. All right.